Okay, it looks like we are live. Okay, today we're going to talk about 6 ways that you can make your crochet and your knitting look less homemade and more handmade. There are some fine, subtle differences in work that is a craft versus what is an artisan level. And that applies across the board to whatever craft we're participating in, whether that is our knitting or crochet, it could be painting, it could be even the way that we make an apple pie for Thanksgiving dinner. I have a friend who makes such gorgeous, beautiful, beautiful pies. My pies don't look like that. So, and that's okay, but she has some very subtle tips that could elevate even my very rustic, primitive looking pies. And I wanted to share some of these tips about knitting and crochet that can help that go from being just a handmade craft that you do to something that's now a handmade heirloom. Let's talk about that today. I'm Suzi Quillen. I am the Empress of Yarn here at Perfectly Knotty, and I'm so glad you are tuning in. So I will look sometimes because I've got notes here. I'm going to look over here sometimes because I have notes on my computer. I want to make sure that I don't forget some of my points of topic. Okay, so let's get going. The first place that we're going to start is, at the beginning. That's, in the old song from Sound of Music, let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start, right? So, the very beginning, we need to talk about choosing the right yarn for your project. And whether you're knitting or you're crocheting, I really want you to consider the yarn. A lot of times, and I see this much more with my crocheters than I do with my knitters for some reason, I'm not sure, but maybe if you have some comments on that, you can add that in the comments, and we can address that at another time. But we often start out by searching whatever yarn is the cheapest, and we know, again, across the board in so many areas of our life, that cheapest is not always going to get us the quality that we're looking for. Cheap is as cheap does. And that is not to say that cost savings isn't important. It's powerful and it's really crucial, absolutely. But you need to consider what the end result of your project is going to be. If you are making a blanket for your grandchild to drag around and lay on the floor and leave out in the yard and things like that, don't use the super expensive yarn. Just don't. If you are making a sweater for yourself to wear to church on Sunday, to wear to work, and you want it to last a long time and you want 10, 20 years from now for that sweater to still be relevant in your wardrobe, then invest in the yarn that you are choosing. If you have ever done the experiment of making the exact same item with different types of yarn, you know what I'm talking about. There is no, and this is not a judgment. This is a measure of what is most suitable for the project that you are working on. This right here is a yarn. that is probably older than I am. It's so old, this color is back in again. In my neck of the woods, we call this Seahawk Action Green. This yarn is acrylic. It is not soft, but I use it quite a bit when I'm teaching because it shows up on camera, because it's really durable when I'm stitching and unstitching things and reusing it. It holds up well because this stuff is armor. It has a roll. Some of the finer, more soft yarns that I would actually use for a project don't tolerate the process of filming things over and over and over again to get the shot correct, to get the right angles. So I'm going to use this yarn for that. So I don't want you to hear what I'm saying about choosing a quality yarn as a judgment. I want you to think about what is the end result that you are trying to accomplish. Okay. So that is going to be the first thing that I want you to do. That's the most important place to start, whether you're knitting or you are crocheting, is choose the right yarn for your project. The second thing is understanding gauge and your tension. One of the things I see all the time that makes our work look less quality, lower quality, um, a little bit more primitive is inconsistent tension or tension that lacks structure. So the stitches just sort of flop and they don't stand up and do their job. And that I am going to bring this back again to my previous comment about what is the objective of the project? Because there are times in projects where you do want that. There are times if you're making a blanket or you're making a hat and you want there to be structure. So how we improve our tension, our gauge, our structure is a number of ways. One, we learn how to swatch and we learn how to measure our stitches so that we know how many stitches do I have in an inch or in a 4-inch swatch, whether you're knitting or you're crocheting. And in that, you need to understand the architecture of your stitches. Where are the loops going? How are the loops entangling and intertwining with each other to create the stitches that you're trying to create? And when you understand those things, you can understand how to adjust to make it tighter, to make it looser, to give it more height, or make the width correct. Sometimes it's as subtle as leaving the same needle or hook size, but changing to a different material from metal to wood or to plastic or vice versa. So experiment with those things and start making, even if it's just mental notes for yourself about how these elements play into the way that you stitch. Also think about your body ergonomics when you are stitching. Are you sitting like this and way over hunched over like this? That's going to give you something different than if you are sitting. Oh, I threw my pen on the floor. Than if you're sitting up straight, using good posture, supporting your arms. One of the things I've been seeing, and I'm really liking this, I haven't tried it myself, but I think it's fabulous, is using something like a boppy pillow, which are those pillows that you use for a baby, and they're kind of shaped like a neck horseshoe pillow, but they're giant. They're huge. They're like this big round, and they have the donut hole in the middle. We put that on yourself with that here, and it's going to support your arms and keep your shoulders from and doing all these weird things. And it's also going to help keep your neck from being pulled down and keeping your neck in a neutral position. Those things you might be really, really surprised at how your posture when you are knitting and crocheting impacts the quality of the work you're producing. I sadly, in Zoom calls, quite often will see people that are sitting like this, almost in a reclining position, which means their head is pulled even more forward. And I really would like to see us more upright. And that's going to improve your physical health in addition to the quality of your stitching. Tension, I touched on that a little bit. Your own personal ergonomics and tension. Are you using ergonomic hooks? Should you be using ergonomic hooks? All of these things can play in. The material that your hooks and knitting needles are made out of can play a huge role. So test that. If you have different types of needle materials, test and see which things are moving better with your yarn. Some needle materials are very slippery, some are very grippy, and if your yarn is grippy and your needles are grippy, you're gonna be fighting, you're gonna be pulling, and that can damage your yarn fibers. You can be if it's too slippery, things can be dropping and falling, and you can lose count. So I want you to experiment with these things, and I'm gonna touch on how to do that in another, I have a note down here to talk about that, but, I have a tip for that too, so don't go away. Stick through the video, you guys. Stick through, and I'm gonna turn my volume off over here. Don't need that going on. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Um, so let's see what's next. Oh, creating your stitches correctly. Now this is gonna stay in our category of tension and gauge and things of that nature. When we are executing our stitches correctly, it is going to vastly improve the overall look of our project. In crochet, there often is a lot of confusion, especially for newer stitchers, the difference between yarn over and yarn under. And sometimes we'll see somebody putting the hook in and grabbing the yarn this way with the hook and pulling it through, where it's intended for the yarn to come over the hook and get pulled through. So understanding the difference and how that plays out, and that can make your stitches tighter and more and smaller, or larger and relaxed and out. You need to understand that it also impacts the way the stitches actually look because it completely changes the way that the loops lay together as they're interlocking together. These are not necessarily wrong, and I did, and I did use the word correctly, but it is imperative that you understand how that impacts the way that your stitches look, the way that they lay. In knitting, we often see this whether we're knitting into the front loop or the back loop, and that changes the way that the loops sit on the needle going one way or the other. In knitting, we see it with the way that we're increasing and decreasing, and just quite the angle maybe that we put the knitting needle into the stitches that we're trying to work. So, in learning and paying attention and testing and seeing what effect you're getting, it is really important in these cases to be consistent. Make if you're doing it one way and you like the effect that you're getting, be consistent throughout your project. Don't change technique partway through because it will show in your so those things. Let's see. Um, in all of this, one of the things I really want you to think about is what is the overall effect that you are going for, and take that into account. Because if you are going for a super relaxed, primitive, that's great. Understand your intention. I've had pieces at the fair get judged at the fair, and that sets a standard for what we're trying to execute. So I want you to be aware of that. Step number tip number 4, is about finishing our projects. We start our project well, we finish our project well, and in the middle, we execute our project well, and our project will come out well. So, finishing a project, in knitting, choosing the correct bind off. Don't choose a bind off that's, if you only know how to knit 2 and lift 1 over and knit 1 and lift 1 over and lift 1, you're gonna end up with a really tight bind off. But there are lots and lots and lots of different ways that you can bind off. I have in my Amazon influencer store, I have a book called 54 Ways to Cast On and Bind Off for your knitting. That's gonna, like, be a game changer to help you walk through and choosing the right cast on and bind off for your project. I have my favorites that I generally go to, but they also don't apply to every project that I'm doing. So think about that. With crochet, um, we don't have to end with a knot. We've often been so drilled into our head that we finish off by tying a knot. There's no knots. Don't make knots in your knitting or your crochet. Um, we don't have to. If you know how to weave in your ends correctly, and you just pull the yarn through the last stitch all the way, cut it and pull it all the way through, and leave yourself a nice tail that's 6 inches long. It gives you plenty of room to weave your ends in thoroughly so they don't come unraveled and it doesn't make a knot. And in doing that, when you're pulling that tail down along the stitch, when you brought your yarn out through the stitch and you go to weave it in, don't collapse that last stitch on your row, rounding off your corners. Don't do that. Keep the tension gentle that's suitable so that it matches the whole project. Thinking about seaming, how do we want those seams to look? What material are you using to seam with? Are you using a structural stitched together seam? Are you actually doing a sewn seam like a mattress hem or a whip stitch? And you need to don't choose your construction technique based on what is easier. Because if you choose the one that is easier, you're more likely to have a lower quality finish. So choose the one that is right and give yourself permission and grace to not be good at it at first, and give yourself permission that this is practice. I'm going to touch on that practicing part in a few minutes, so don't go away. I haven't gotten to that one yet, okay? We've got 2 more, and then I'm gonna touch on that one, so don't go away. All right. Um, mistakes, and this goes right along with what I just talked about with seaming and even what I talked about earlier in understanding the, architecture of your stitches. Allow yourself to make mistakes, but don't allow your mistakes to set the tone for your project. Learn how to recognize your mistake, learn how to fix your mistake. With knitting, sometimes you can just take a few stitches off the needle and ladder down, fix it, and bring your work back up. Sometimes if there's a missed stitch, everything is too tight and it will just pull and it will not look right, and you do need to tink back. Tink is unknitting. I have a video about that. In knitting, use a lifeline so that way if you do have to pull the needle out and go back again, you're not ripping everything out. If you do have to frog your yarn out, frogging is because we go rip it, rip it, rip it. But if you do have to pull your work completely, please do it gently. Damage the fibers of your yarn by pulling hard. And when your fibers of your yarn start sticking together, I want you to do something that is kind of counterintuitive. I want you to set it in your lap, and let go of it for a moment. The way to get your yarn to unravel out of the stitches is one loop at a time. And sometimes we have to take our crochet hook or our knitting needle and follow the yarn loops back the way that they came and lift them apart because the fibers, especially if you whether you're using an acrylic or an animal-based fiber, the halo, the little fuzzy parts of it, they grab hold of each other. If you pull them apart by pulling on the end of the yarn, you're stretching the yarn and you're damaging the yarn. But if you can get your knitting needle or your crochet hook in there and you can convince those fibers to let go of each other, your yarn will come apart much more easily. It is kind of a tedious process, but it is part of your stitching process. It's part of your stitching journey. So I want you to pause with that and recognize it for what it is. It's just part of your stitching. Whether you're knitting or you're crocheting, you're unknitting or you're uncrocheting, it's all part of the journey and exploring and create a pause with it. You're not at work or you have a deadline or somebody's gonna get fired or, you know, this is your art and this be with it. Just relax with it and be with it and allow yourself to enjoy the process. The other thing that is really important to me for you in that is that when you are taking your stitches out one loop at a time, and that can be quickly or slowly depending on how the yarn is reacting, I want you to pay attention as you're pulling the yarn out of the stitch. I want you to watch it, and I want you to see the way that the loops came together and envision how the yarn went over your hook or under your hook, or which way your needle went into the stitch, through the front or through the back or what have you. And envision in reverse how that stitch got created, because that is going to aid you in one of those first points I made about understanding the architecture of your stitches. And the more that you understand the architecture of the stitches that you are making, the more elevated the quality of your stitches are going to become. Now we're back to we're down to what the last one that I've been asking you to hold out for. I am giving you permission. I am actually requesting that you enjoy this process of your stitching and experiment and test things and try things and try different types of yarn. And if sometimes it is expensive or it's difficult to get a hold of, but experiment with different types of yarn and different sizes of yarn. There's this big trend in recent years for bigger, chunkier yarn, but that makes bigger, chunkier things. And yeah, you can kind of sometimes get the instant gratification of finishing something in a short amount of time. And there's a time and a place for that. So we're going to go back to what is the intention, right? So keep those and things in mind. But don't be afraid of small yarn. Small yarn can be very forgiving. You could often use much larger needles and hooks than the size of the yarn might indicate up front. And your finished fabric is going to have a weight and a thickness and a feel that is often much more suitable for wearing. It feels better on the body. Think about that. It's a big tip that I want you to try is making things that I call inconsequential. I experiment with new techniques by making things that are gonna maybe be useful for someone, but they are practice pieces for me. Scarves are a really, really great way to practice a beginning, whether you're crocheting and you're using a foundation single, double, or half crochet, or you're knitting and you wanna experiment with different types of cast on. A scarf generally is 12 to 18 inches wide, so you're dealing with a relatively low number of starting stitches. So that's a really great place to start with those experiments. Try a new cast on or a new foundation stitch, and then practice a new stitch. You can do this as a sampler. Perhaps you pick one particular stitch that you want to practice, and you work that for 6 or 8 inches, and you explore it, and you try it, and then you switch. Maybe change to a different yarn or a different color of the same type of yarn, and you go a little further with a different one, whatever, or do the whole project, it doesn't matter. Explore, experiment. I want you to experiment with knowing where your first and your last stitches are so that you're getting edges to your project that are on purpose. I want all of your stitches to be on purpose. I want you to have made choices. I want you to know and understand, so you are choosing the stitches and the applications and the tools. And the more that you do it, the more you build a database in your mind, and then you can almost intuitively know which yarn, which tool, which pattern are gonna go well together, but it takes time and it takes practice. There's no absolute formula because your own personal ergonomics plays such a powerful role in this. And by making things that are inconsequential, and making scarves that you can donate to a local shelter or, foster care support program or whatever is a meaningful thing right now. We have all of these people on the East Coast that have been detrimentally impacted by Hurricane Helene, and now we've got Milton coming in on its heels, and they haven't even cleaned up debris, and they have towns they can't even get into, and people have been devastated. Maybe that's an opportunity for you to practice making things. But on that note, I am also going to pause right there because I don't want you just making things and then pawning them off on an organization, dumping them on an organization that doesn't have a way to distribute them. You have an organization or a need in your community in mind. I do want you to reach out to those distribution centers, whether it's your food bank or a shelter or the Red Cross, whatever it is, okay? Reach out to them and ask them, if you were to provide a dozen hats, is that something they're gonna be able to distribute? Because some areas they don't, because they don't have a place to store them. Some, organizations have some pretty strict standards about things being, pet or allergen free and some other aspects of that. So please do know what the organization you want to support needs for their people. So do know that. But if you get all those pieces in place, making hats is a fabulous way. If you wanna learn how to do increases and decreases, hats are brilliant for that. Whether you start at the top and work down, that's increasing, or you start at the bottom and work up, you're working on your decreases. Small amounts of yarn, they don't have to take forever. So, are some of my tips. And after you've practiced with these tips and techniques and experimented with these different things, and now you've got these objects that you can donate to people who are going to say, "Somebody cares enough about me to make a hat or a blanket or a scarf." Now you have elevated your skills, so when you pick up that beautiful luxury llama yarn that you have in your stash, in your collection, that you wanted to make something special for, but it's been scaring you because you don't wanna wreck it. Now you've elevated your skills and you can confidently make that beautiful thing out of that beautiful yarn and be happy with it. And it's gonna take your knitting and crochet from a handmade or a homemade craft to handmade work of art. I'm Suzi Quillen. I'm the Empress of Yarn here at Perfectly Knotty. Please subscribe to my channel. Please share these videos that I offer you. If you have more things that you would like me to talk about, I would value your input. You can head over to perfectlyknotty.com and you can sign up for my newsletter. If you go to my contact form, you can submit a question, and your question just might end up in one of these very handy little videos that I make. So I hope that helps you. And now I am going to see if I'm gonna oh, there's the new they moved the end it button again. So thanks for being with me today, you guys. I really appreciate it. Take care. Hope to see you soon. Subscribe, share, like, thumbs up this. You can also click the little button, and if this was helpful for you, there's a thanks button down there below this video, and you can send me a cup of coffee because I drink a lot of coffee every day. I appreciate you. Bye. Have a good day.